Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Joshablon, and welcome back to our series on humans. Now, today we are going to be covering a topic that I've kind of been dreading, and that topic is hair. I'm not the best at drawing hair. I'm still learning, so I'm just going to give kind of what I know, just kind of in this little tutorial, and hopefully it'll be helpful to some people. Sorry if I get anything wrong, as just kind of a little side note before we start. So, just a couple conceptions about hair that I'm just going to say you shouldn't really do when drawing hair would be kind of the single strand method is what I call it. And it's where you go and you just draw out like literally every single individual tiny strand of hair. And then you slowly build it up and everything. Like, you should not be doing that. And then going in and, like, doing various details in your hair. Like, we're going to have there's a tiny highlight there, a tiny highlight there, a little highlight there. Like, that is not how you want to be doing your hair. So, just getting that out of the way immediately. Another way you don't want to do your hair, there are going to be dark patches and light patches in your hair. Just due to the highlights, depending on where your light source is coming from. But one thing that you don't want to do is have a whole bunch of kind of dark patches and everything, and then you kind of leave a light patch in the middle, and then just keep going and continuing on with your strand of hair. Just kind of have your darker line there, just kind of a little bit of shading on this side. Maybe have the next strand of hair that's starting here and whatnot, and then just leaving that blank part in the middle. You don't want to be doing that because realistically, that's not how it's going to work. There will be various strands that are going to be flowing through that as well. And yeah, so that's another way how you don't want to be doing hair. So, I'm just going to start off where I think is a good place to start off, which is kind of just the head. Because without a head, we don't know where we're going to be placing our hair. So, there we go. We're just going to kind of, I don't know what I was doing with that line. We're just going to kind of quickly draw out a basic sketch for our head. So, here we go. There's kind of our chin, jawline that comes up. There's kind of our head. Not a perfect top, but okay. And there we go. There's kind of our head. We're going to add just a little bit of a neck right in there. I can redo that neck. That wasn't terribly well done. I'll make it a little bit curved just for the video, I suppose. And there we go. There's kind of our basic head shape that we're going to be using in this video. Sorry, just considering if I want to change a specific part. And now we'll keep it just hair concentrated. We'll deal with jawline and everything later. So, just gonna very briefly run back to kind of Riley's method and whatnot for a sec. So there's this bottom part, the chin. We're gonna kind of have, we're gonna say that that's probably halfway up the head. That's gonna be there. So there'll be kind of our eyebrow line and our nose line. So, as you know, the head is separated into thirds. So there's your chin, your nose line, eyebrow line, and then kind of where your hair starts. It's going to be the start of your hairline. And so that's just one important little detail to know, because you want to know exactly where your hair is going to start. Now, moving forward, we have our hairline now. There is a place where your hair parts, and that is going to usually, well, it doesn't matter really which side, but it's not right in the middle. You're not going to have hair parting like right here and going along to either side. It's not going to happen. If you put enough product or anything in your hair, you could plausibly pull off a hairstyle like that, but in general, it doesn't go that way. So you want to start kind of a little bit on the line, but a little bit just, it needs to be on that same level as the line, is what I'm trying to say, but not centered on the head. As you can see, this one's quite a bit over. So that's kind of what I was trying to say. All right. So there's kind of the spot that we're going to be starting on. Now, generally some people, they don't exactly know how physics works and how gravity just pulls down. And so when you have hair, it's not really going to be doing much of that. Like, unless it's actually coming over this part of the head here that's actually curving upwards, it's not going to do that. Like, if it's shorter, kind of like this, then yes, it may do that depending on the product you put in and whatnot. But in general, if you're going to have longer hair, you're probably going to want to be covering stuff more like that, because that is just a little bit more realistic of a curve as it kind of starts to go down. So that's just one quick thing. So I'm just going to quickly cover kind of a longer hairstyle, because that way I think I'm going to be able to get most of the techniques that we want kind of into our kind of hairstyle. So we're going to have it kind of come down. It will start to curl depending on if your hair is curly or not, and various other factors. So we're going to have it kind of start to curve a little bit this way, and then down. So there we go. I'm just going to make a little bit more of that curve. And there we go, it'll start coming up. One thing that I see when people want to draw hair is they usually draw it big and bulbous on top and everything. It's not really like that. Hair is quite thin, and so it really doesn't make that thick of a layer when it's on top. So, like, the top of our head is here, so I might put the hair, like, maybe up here. That'll be kind of where it is. It'll curve outwards from our hair part line. Just thought I'd mention that. And yeah, so then it comes down. And there we go, there's kind of the start of our hair. Same thing on the other side, it'll also be parting kind of in that direction. We'll keep it nice and close to the head. Have a little bit of that there. And yeah, so there we go. We'll maybe get a couple other strands kind of coming in here. You want to have it make sense with the specific hairstyle that you have, though, when you're drawing hair. So, yeah. It's important that you get it right. I just wasn't happy with that curve, which is why I got rid of that. So, yeah. Again, sorry if I'm doing lots of this wrong. I'm not a master at hair. I haven't spent too long learning about it, and so this is not something I'm really used to drawing ever. So yeah. From what I've heard, though, I watched a few other drawing tutorials, and typically when drawing something like this, you're going to be wanting to do a lot of really, really light lines at the beginning. I know I'm not really doing that. I really should have my pencil on a little bit of a lighter opacity, so sorry about that. But yeah. So now you kind of see the lighter lines I was meaning just there. Just gonna redo a part here. Yeah. And also, I just thought I'd mention this too. I did this method on paper, and it worked quite well. It looks nice and realistic and everything. I have it just sitting beside me with some notes on it. So I'm not exactly sure, though, if this method works perfectly on digitally. So we will see if it does, in fact, work. I hope it does. So we're going to kind of just give our figure a few curls, because why not? It looks nice. Well, kind of nice, I suppose. There we go, there are just a few curls. We'll have a few more kind of locks coming down and make them a few varying lengths. like if you'll notice on this side, I kind of made them all kind of the same length, which isn't really what you want to do. You want to have just a little bit more variation in all of your locks. And in general, it'll make it look a little bit more realistic because they're not all the same size. Or same length, I should say. So I'm just going to fix that a little bit on this side. So there we go. Like, that's a little bit better, I think. So there we go. There's kind of our basic hairstyle that we're going to do. I'm not an expert with hairstyles, so sorry. But now we're going to be dealing a bit more with the technique of how we're going to be going about shading this thing, because hair is kind of difficult to shade. And we're going to start kind of up here where the hair parts. So on this part line right here, it isn't going to be especially dark. If you look at any kind of picture, you look in the mirror and you look at kind of the part line, if it's a hairstyle kind of like this, more female hairstyles will have this if the woman has longer hair. Generally, you'll be able to see just kind of a little kind of lighter line as you're able to see skin because the hair is pulled back from that part. If someone has maybe messier hair, or if it's just shorter and so it all goes mostly in one direction and it doesn't part to the sides, then you won't really see that. Like with most guys' hair, because it's shorter, most of this part's going to be covered up because there'll be parts that are going kind of up and down the whole way, all the way along. And so you're not really going to be seeing that. And so just for this particular hair, we are going to have it be a little bit lighter. And to kind of show that it's lighter, we're going to make it a little bit darker, kind of around where this hair is parting. An important thing when you're drawing all of these lines, you want them to be going in the specific shape of the hair. You want it to follow your shape. You don't want to be doing all of your lines going like this way, for example, because like it's not doing that on this part of the hair. This part of the hair here, it's going down in a curve like this, and so you want it to follow along, because that way it'll just make it just a little bit more three-dimensional, and that is one thing that you do want to achieve when doing your hair. So there we go. Like you can see, I'm just following along. It's a good little thing to do. Have a little tiny gap in between. It's a little bit of a lighter gap. It's always a good thing. And there we go. Try to keep it straight. It doesn't need to be super, like, super light, but it is generally good if it is just a little bit lighter. So as you can see, you can kind of see where that hairline is, which is good. Now, moving on to some of the bigger stuff. I don't know if I'm going to be doing both sides of the hair, because that would be quite a long video, but we'll see. So, going along, we need to first decide kind of where our light source is going to be coming from. I'm going to say that it's kind of coming up from here, approaching from the front. So, this part will be a little dark, because just the way we have it curved away. And then it'll get a little bit lighter and a little bit lighter. Now you may be noticing that I'm just drawing strands. This is not going to be drawing individual strands. You'll kind of see what it is later. It's kind of just making the tones that we want in our hair. Wherever we want it dark, we want kind of a gradient coming out of that. And yeah. If you'll notice, kind of this center part of the hair is quite a bit lighter than kind of around the edges. And I'm doing that on purpose. It's not just because there are a lot more dense lines on the edges, it's just because that's the way it is going to be. So there we go. Now you can have your hair be all nice and straight and just in one perfect section if you want. It'll vary with like straight hair and curly hair and stuff like that. But right now I'm thinking that I'm just going to keep it mostly in just one clear plain section. So yeah. I'm just going to very lightly erase kind of back here, because that is a bit too bright because of the size I made, or the darkness that I made the outline of the top of the head here. So I'm just going to kind of erase a little bit in this area just so that I can kind of shade it back in and make it a little bit better. So there we go. So, yeah. So, as you notice, I'm still making sure that all of my strokes, they follow the shape that the hair is taking at any particular moment. What is kind of just looked on kind of poorly is if you go like this, just kind of scribbling along trying to fill it in, because that's not what we're trying to accomplish here. And we're also not trying to accomplish to give it kind of a hair-like feel. Some people, they might look at it and say, oh yeah, that kind of looks like hair. Really, it doesn't. So, moving back in, I'm just going to add just our little tiny bit more shading kind of along this edge, a little bit more of that gradient that's going in, just a little bit more of those mid-tones and darker tones, because those are important to have. And this helps identify kind of where the light source is coming from. As you can see, we can kind of tell just a little bit more where the light source is coming from. So it's quite useful. There we go. That's quite nice. So it's looking just a little bit more realistic. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go and kind of blur it all, because by blurring it'll kind of give it all that tone. If we zoom in super close, you can tell like where there's hair and where there isn't hair, and that's not something that we want. We want it to all kind of seem as one uniform kind of flow. So we're going to get a really big blur, and we're just going to go in, blur the whole thing, and this will kind of give it that one kind of flow to it. There we go. And that's kind of what you're wanting. So now we're just going to go back in with our pencil. I'm just going to very briefly kind of sketch some lines, kind of where we wanted them originally. We're not going to try to avoid any place. We're not going to try to, well, we will put particular emphasis on places that kind of need shading, but yeah. But now, as you can see, when we're putting all of these lines back, it looks a little bit more uniform. So there we go, we get a few more lines. You don't need to cover the whole thing again, just covering a little bit is decent enough. Alright, and now that we're kind of done that, we are going to take our eraser, and this is where the highlights are going to come in. I'm going to make it really big, but really small. So, and we're just going to kind of create kind of a few lines. They will be at different widths and everything, depending on like the specific hair length on some specific parts. So, yeah, it's just important that we have a few of these. They're rather important. I'm going to go back in kind of just with our pencil so that we can... Oh, wrong thing. So that we can just get a few kind of darker tones going through this whole thing. Because it is still important to have some dark tones. If you look at highlights in hair, you're still going to be noticing a few really dark patches. Not because light isn't hitting it, but, well, actually that's exactly why. But it's because that specific strands of hair, if they're kind of clumped up, and then there is like shadow behind them. So that's an important thing to kind of know. So as you can see, it's just looking a little bit more like it. Again, we're kind of getting that single strand thing, which isn't quite what we want. I'm going to make my blur just a little bit smaller, just come in, blur it just a little bit more. I'm leaving a couple patches that are kind of unblurred. I did that on purpose. Now we're just going to go in kind of with our eraser. Going to make it a little bit less opacity. There we go. We're going to kind of make a few kind of lines, just a few strands of hair that are going to be just a little bit just a little bit less shaded than the other ones, just a little bit lighter than the other ones. There's some on which light shines quite brightly, and some where it doesn't shine quite as brightly. So yeah. Generally, when you're facing away from the light source, you're going to have less and less of these. And so yeah. So that's kind of very basically how you're going to be creating your realistic looking hair. Sorry if I missed some things, or if you don't think that this is adequate enough. I might just cover it on pencil and paper another day, because I find pencil and paper to be quite a lot easier than on digital. So, yeah. So that's very basically how to do that. That's kind of our good copy how our hair is going to look in the end. I'm not going to do that everywhere else. I'm just going to very briefly show you some shading down kind of here and how we're going to be accomplishing that, because it will be quite a bit different, especially kind of here around the head. Now around the head it will be quite a lot darker. You still want to be following the same kind of strokes though. So like all the way around here, if you'll notice this edge here on the hair, that's going to mean that there's going to be a bit of shadow kind of along here, so you want to capture that. Capturing this is going to make a lot of depth in your image. Wherever it's dark, it'll kind of go way into the distance, and wherever it's light, it is kind of going to pop out a little bit. Like, you can tell that there's a little bit of curvature kind of coming out under there, because it's a little bit darker under this side here, and it's a lot lighter kind of in this area. So, moving forward, I'm just going to have a little bit of dark here, and then it'll kind of leach out kind of just to a few kind of mid-tones that we're going to have. Well, they're not super bright. We don't necessarily want them to be, though. Probably blur those just to get them a little bit brighter, maybe. We'll erase a tiny bit, just to give it a little bit of brightness. And then we'll blur it again. There we go. That's a little bit back down. Okay. Just going to create our edges again. There we go. Again, we'll just start following the hairline and whatnot, the way that the hair is shaped. And so you can kind of see where it follows it. So that's kind of how we're going to be making it underneath, and you can see how that actually works with how our hair is positioned above it. Here, it'll kind of be the same thing, not quite as bad because it's not as far back. I say not as bad as if it's a bad thing, but like not as deeply shadowed is what I was meaning. Gets quite a bit brighter here quite quickly. It'll be hitting a bit of highlight around this area, and then it kind of curves away. And yeah. So that's kind of how that generally goes. We're just going to quickly go in, handle this. I'm going to make it a bit darker here because this is behind that. There we go. We're going to come in, blur this a little bit. We're going to go in with our eraser. We're going to just erase a couple little strands. Just kind of in this highlighted area. Yeah, those don't really work. Again, need to be going along with the shape of the hair. Also, you don't want to be just having all of the same sized lines. Like just, if you have a whole bunch of lines and they're kind of just like this, all the same length, like you zoom out and kind of look at it and you can very clearly tell that something's wrong. But if you kind of do it a little bit more subtly, you have just a few lines of varying thickness. So you have a couple of kind of thin lines. You have maybe a bold line or two. Not quite that bold, but you kind of get the point. You just have some lines like that. And you're going to be able to zoom out, and you're going to be able to see a lot of difference. And it actually looks a lot more realistic. So yeah, that is very basically how to do hair. Sorry I didn't finish this whole thing, but yeah, it would take quite a long time for me to finish the rest of it. This video is already long, and I didn't want it to go too much longer. So yeah, thank you everybody so much for watching, and I will see you in the next tutorial.